Hey guys, I'm back. I had a little allergy emergency this morning. Otherwise, I was going to do this morning because I've been kind of thinking about it last night since the basically the new footage dropped, the body cam footage, and I just wanted to have I guess it's not really a discussion, but kind of talk my mind on basically this whole George Floyd situation. And I know that's a dangerous situation, but dangerous thing I should say to talk about, but Um, the body cam footage was enlightening. So one of the things I was curious about, because basically the initial footage everybody saw is basically the dude is they're holding Floyd down, and the one cop has the basically he's got his knee on the back of his neck for what was it, a good 7 8 almost 9 minutes basically. He's putting pressure on the back of the neck to hold him down. And it's a little hard to tell because there's like pictures and videos from other angles, basically like whether he was the only one at all times on them, or all three of these guys trying to hold this guy down. And now there's some pretty clear pictures of him looking up at like people looking at him, and we saw that. And the question was basically, was this deliberate homicide? Was this negligent homicide? What's going on here? Because this dude shouldn't have had his basically a knee on his neck for 8 minutes. And what could have possibly have led up to this? Because the thing they were initially approaching him about was apparently a counterfeit $20 bill. Well, the body cam footage was kind of enlightening. Really, all this riot and insanity, it's actually completely misplaced. The hate for these officers is completely misplaced. The other three guys, it doesn't seem like they really realized that that the officer was being basically was hurting him as bad as he was, and now it's in question of whether I guess his name is Chauvin, whether he actually realized essentially that he was doing something extremely dangerous. Um, the footage, if it's on, don't watch the little clips. I believe it's the Daily Mail, I think, that had it. Somebody had just filmed it from their phone. I think it should have been released pretty early on, uh, because it provides a lot of context to kind of what happened. Um, so if you look it up, you'll see what I mean. But basically, the footage that they start, the relevant part, basically, the police officer approaches Floyd, who at this point is trying to drive away, and it looked like he had a passenger in the car. It was a little unclear. So Floyd starts panicking. He's freaking out. He's acting really squirrely. Now this of course causes the officer to say, "Whoa, let me see your hands." Floyd's telling him, "I'm not. I've been in a situation." His mouth is running a mile a minute, and he's panicking. He's got like tears forming in his eyes. Something's going on. Now the officer is like, "God, what is in his right hand?" Basically, because he puts his left hand on the steering wheel and his right hand is digging around, whether it's digging for his license or whatever he's doing. And the cop's saying, "Put your hand on the steering wheel," and then the cop pulls his gun out and he says, "Put your hand on the steering wheel." Like, seriously, like, you don't go digging for stuff when a cop is approaching you, particularly in like an arrest situation. So Floyd's panicking and he's saying, "No." He's like, "Oh, no, you're gonna shoot me. You're gonna shoot me. I got shot in a situation like this before." And then the cop very patiently was like, "Well, it's because I need to see your hands." Um, and it was a very human moment. Basically, you can see Floyd. He's got a lot going on in his head. Perhaps he's suffered a traumatic event in terms of basically he had something really bad happen to him in a situation like this before, and it's causing him to act kind of erratic. And the cop, of course, doesn't know Floyd, doesn't know him. It seems, as we know, didn't know him personally, although apparently had worked at the same nightclub as him. A little unclear, but at least the cop. I don't know if the one in the body cam footage was Chauvin or not. I tend to think it was, considering kind of what happened. Also, the from a distance stuff, the film of him getting pulled out of the car, put in the car, pulled out of the car. That with the body cam was so much more. It was so much more clear what was happening. So basically, Floyd, they take him out of the vehicle, and the issue isn't so much the $20 bill thing, it's that he's acting erratic. There's some sort of problem, so they can't resolve what's going on, and it seems like he has some sort of drug in his system. And basically, the autopsy test said that, yeah, he did. He had a bunch of drugs in his system. Recently lost his job from COVID. I mean, people do stupid stuff and they fall down. I don't think that's necessarily a criminal behavior, but that basically, I wouldn't have been 100% believing that, like thinking that, oh, maybe, you know, like oh, maybe they're just saying that because, you know, that makes it like more, you know, not basically, someone could say something like that, like, oh yeah, he had drugs in his system, and then it's kind of like Rodney King, like they all beat the shit out of him. Yeah, he did. He had meth in his system, but that wasn't really the relevant thing that happened with the crime. I don't think it was meth. It was cocaine or something. Like the dude was like ramped up. In this case, Floyd's having a nervous breakdown. He was just in a vehicle with the windows up, and now he's afraid this cop's going to shoot him, and the cop's trying to tell him like I just need to see your hands, like stop, like, you know, basically like you're freaking out and that's causing me to freak out. Cop was very patient. Floyd gets out of the car, they cuff him. Now Floyd's a big dude, and I think one of the other shorter officers cuffed him. And you know, if you're nervous and shaking, and like if you ever like have had like metal handcuffs on and you're like pulling, resisting, or you're really tense, they hurt. And the only way to get around it is to relax yourself. Well, he wasn't relaxing, so he's panicking because now he's in handcuffs and he's freaking out. And they're talking to him, they're trying to calm him down. They're like, okay, we're gonna put you in the patrol car because it looked like they were probably gonna either take him to the hospital or take him to the police station, because there's a couple minutes in the middle of the body cam footage where they're talking to people who were with him. And he's like, oh, let me see your ID. And like the one lady's there, she's like, oh, I don't have an ID. And the cop doesn't really give her a hard time. And they're just asking her like, hey, is and they ask like, is he on drugs? Like, he doesn't seem right. And the lady says, no, I don't think he does that. And the guy says, the guy says, I don't know. And they just talk. And it's clear that they're concerned about his well-being more than, you know, stopping any sort of crime in process. So then the rest of the video you see, or I should say the second, I guess, half of the video really is they've talked to the officer who's involved, talked to the two people. Somewhere off screen, basically, Floyd's been cuffed, and you can hear him talking, and he's trying to say, "I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a bad guy. I'm not like," and the cops are like, "Okay, we understand, but we have to take you where we're taking you." So they tried to sit him in the back of the patrol car, which I think was like an SUV. And Floyd's saying, I'm claustrophobic, I can't breathe. He's having a panic attack. And did the drugs contribute to that? Probably. But that made me, it really humanized him, I should say. Like he was freaking out. And the cops, it seemed like, were doing everything in their power to just calm him down, get him in the car. They say, look, we're going to roll the windows down. No, I'm so sorry, you can't sit in the front. Look, just come in, roll the windows down. We'll roll the windows down. We got to take you to where we're going. And he the whole time, it's not so much he's worried about being taken somewhere. He's worried about getting shot. He's not being rational. And you can see that he wasn't particularly violent, but he is a huge dude. So like all four of these cops are kind of all standing around, and they were being surprisingly kind to him. It wasn't anything. It wasn't like what the media and the activists led us to believe. Not only that, when he's in the car, you see the officer whose body cam it is walks around to the other side, the other door, and he says, "Look, I'll pull you in. Look, we got to get you in there. We got to get your legs in. I'll pull you in, basically, because the guy, he couldn't bring himself to do it." Well, they pull him in. And he starts basically like kicking his legs, and he's actually the one who sort of forces himself out the other side of the car. And of course, his handcuffs are cuffed, so the cop's actually not so much pulling him out of the car as Floyd is actually pushing himself all the way out. Like he went in one side and went out the other. And he's like, I can't breathe. I'm claustrophobic. I'm having a problem. So basically, the cops give up on getting him in the car. So it's likely they're either going to wait for him to calm down, or they're going to wait for an ambulance or something. And then he goes flat on the ground. And then if you look at the other footage, now I wish the body cam footage went kind of through the whole saga of where he was being leaned on, so we can hear what these cops are saying. But at the very least, up to that point, it's very, very, very clear that there was not malicious intent. So, and this was something I said when the initial charges were filed against Chauvin and particularly the other three cops. They were trying to go for like second-degree murder. And I said, might not be able to prove that. We don't know what other evidence is gonna emerge, and they're gonna lose the case. Like, they're setting up to fail. Now with this footage out, which I assume the DA should have looked at before they decided what they were going to, or basically what kind of charges they were going to press. That second-degree murder is off the table. First-degree murder is off the table by far. It's possible it's negligent homicide, and if you really stretched it, it's third-degree murder. But there is no sign of intent by any of the officers involved. In fact, you could say maybe it's a training thing. You don't like that not to knee on the neck. Now, I know not to do that because, I guess that's just something I've learned. But if you're, restraining a lot of suspects and basically you're thinking like, oh, it's center of mass where I got to push somebody, it's not clear that the kneeing and what he was doing to him was unintentional. And not only that, Floyd, when he's saying, I can't breathe, he had been saying that before because of the claustrophobia, and he was hyperventilating, and he was having a panic attack, which if you've ever had like an anxiety attack or some sort of like a cardiac event, like you can't breathe, like it's a problem. And it seems like it's not a stretch at all to think that he was saying the same things, like, not now I can't breathe because you're pushing the neck on my neck, but like I can't breathe because I'm having a panic attack. So they leaned on him, they laid him there, and there's a very good chance that with his weak heart, that even if he hadn't put it on his neck, he might have actually still had a heart attack because he was panicking. And from the body cam footage, there is absolutely no evidence of malicious intent by the officers. So basically, premeditated murder or aggravated murder it's off the table. This video, it exonerates the other three officers, which is something I didn't expect because in my head I'm like, wow, man, this dude was like really kneeling and being abusive, and the other three just sat there and let that happen. Well, you see the body cam footage and you see kind of what leads up to what they're doing. 5-8 minutes of confusion in that and all that's not out of the question. Now, did Floyd should Floyd have had the knee on his neck? No. Did the officer have reckless disregard for Floyd's safety? Perhaps in the sense of that tactic itself, but you can see up before that they are very much concerned about his well-being. They're asking about basically drugs he's on. They're saying we're going to roll the window down. They're trying to calm him down, but they got to take him somewhere. So this was not a black and white police abuse homicide at all. This was actually a much more gray and nuanced event where there's really no evidence that these officers intended to hurt him. And there's definitely no evidence that Floyd was trying to cause trouble. What there's evidence of is Floyd essentially having a panic attack. Could the drug and likely the drugs they found in his system probably contributed to that. So there is basically, some people were saying, well, this would have never happened if he hadn't resisted. That's true. Even if you're the wrong guy, if the cop is telling you put the hands on the steering wheel, we have to arrest you, take you in. Hey, you could be completely innocent. They could be abusing you, harassing you. Take it up with the judge later. It is not a good idea to be fighting police officers. Even especially if there's like a group of them and you got an issue with one of them. Hey, just give it up. They've ruined your day, and don't give them an excuse to shoot you. But in Floyd's case, I think he was having a mental medical event. He it seems like if he had the drugs in his system, he probably wasn't already doing well. He mentions COVID. He mentions he's not a bad guy. He mentions he's had some stuff happen to him before. He's going, his mouth is going, he's a mile a minute, and I don't. It doesn't seem like he was intentionally resisting. He just was. He was having an event. He was panicking. Had he not panicked, would the officers have kneeled on him? No. And in fact, Floyd says, "I want to lay on the ground." So they let him lay on the ground. Now he's a huge dude, so they pin him down, and then that's where he ends up putting Officer Chauvin ends up putting the knee on his neck. That ultimately. Everybody pretty much says contributed. That was the image. That was the thing. That, like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. But that would have, a chain of events beforehand would have avoided that. But I look at, having seen the body camera footage, Floyd's agency in that situation, I think he was having, again, I think it was a medical event. It seemed to me that he was having a panic attack. He was crying. He was getting worked up. He couldn't breathe just from them holding him there. He's jerking his arms, which is, because of the handcuffs, and that's just causing them to hurt. And it's really tragic. And instead of a really sad situation that essentially these officers can learn, basically all police officers can learn from this, basically, like, look, if you have a guy having an event like this, he might have a weak heart, there might be, he might be panicking just because he's a big dude. You still don't want to put that kind of pressure on the neck. What are things they can do? Like, at what point do you call an ambulance? Maybe a paddy wagon. Calling for that would have been a better option because it would have more space. Is there a way to call out EMTs and maybe do the testing that they need to do on him right then and there, so they could just sit him on the bench and hold him there? It seemed like they didn't want to create a scene. I mean, he actually sent one of the officers away. Whoever the body cam footage said, "Hey, can you just make sure nobody gets in that car?" Because there was a second patrol car. So that's the fourth officer on the scene. He's been arrested while he's watching to make sure nobody breaks into the patrol car. He's cleared. They should let him. They should have never arrested him, really. They did that just to appease the public. And that's wrong. In fact, he may have a case because that's malicious arrest. Because if you see the footage, you see he actually... That guy, number 4, wasn't involved at all. And not only that, he had absolutely no reason to suspect there was a malicious intent on behalf of any of the other officers up to that point. So the whole narrative changes. Was all this protest and nonsense for nothing? Well, anything happening in George Floyd's name was misinformed. And this is why a lot of us were saying, hey, we want more information. Stefan Molyneux got banned from Twitter, and I actually had an exchange with him. And he doesn't always see the forest for the trees. So he's going on, he's talking about, like, the drugs in Floyd's system could have led to a heart attack and all this other stuff. So, like, it's like, yes, okay, that's possible. I understand what the autopsy says. You still have a video of somebody kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes. Not supposed to do that. Like, that's where in terms of the protocol, what went wrong. Do we know the intent? No. Do we know if the drugs contributed to it? We don't know yet. We don't know how Floyd was acting beforehand. We don't know a lot of things. It was he's cooperating. He was cooperating. And Floyd himself in the body cam footage says, "I'm not resisting." And I think one of the cops is like, "Okay, I know, but you have to get in the car." But he was resisting because he basically got in one end of the car and then he shoveled himself out the back. And that's something people do when they're having a panic attack. He doesn't want to give. He's not trying to hurt the officers. He's not trying to get away, but he's freaking out. He's in the car and he wants to. He's in a position, and they're pinning him not only so that he doesn't hurt them. They're more worried about him probably hurting himself at that point. That's actually, in some ways, that video adds, it makes the video of him being kneeled on harder to watch in some ways, because you see that this guy was basically, he was having an event. I mean, I've been in that situation with anxiety before, where you can't breathe and you're having something pop up, and you start getting flooded with memories, and you're not rational. Now, I imagine if I was having an event like that, and a cop wanted to, first of all, tie my hands and then put me in a police car, back of a car, that would be very, very, very unpleasant. And it seemed like Floyd, who's already like a big dude, that he wasn't having any of that. So, and I understand that, but I also understand the officer's perspective, where it's like they got to get him away from here. They got to calm him down. They got to get him to process him, whether they take him to the station or the hospital, whatever they're doing. And then once he's, like out of the vehicle and he says, okay, I just want to lay down, that they have to hold him in place because he's squirming around. He's at a risk of hurting himself. It didn't seem like Floyd was trying to hurt any of the other officers. At no point does he lash out at them, but he is moving. He's panicking. So, in some ways, it's a good thing, because it's like, okay, Floyd didn't seem to have any malicious intent. He had an event, so Floyd wasn't. It's not that, you could say like, oh, he's responsible because he put drugs in his system, but him having a panic attack is not something he could control at that point. So once that was happening, you can't say like, oh yeah, well he crawled out of the other side of the car and that was his fault. Yeah, technically it was, but it's part of the attack he was having. And you can also, the officers, in terms of like malicious intent, malicious arrest, abuse, it clears all of the other officers completely, and the only person in question is Chauvin, who had the knee on his neck. And now it becomes, instead of reckless endangerment in terms of the well-being of George Floyd, now it looks like essentially did he break a training? Did he break a protocol, or was it simple negligence? Because the intent, this pretty much sinks the black guy being hunted down and abused by police narrative in terms of Floyd. This body cam footage just sinks that, because you can hear the way the officers are talking, the way Floyd's reacting. I mean, Chauvin, who I believe is the guy who the body cam footage was from, he never even raised his voice. Like, other than when he was telling him to put his hand on the steering wheel, and he pulled his gun out, and he was like, you need to put your hands on the steering wheel. Because if you didn't know that basically Floyd, if you didn't go in with biases and you were watching that, and you just were told, hey, look at this scenario, and I'm not going to tell you anything, and you watched that video and you didn't know this whole George Floyd situation, and you see a guy with his big dude with his right hand digging around for something in a car, and you see basically, the body cam footage is from an officer, it's, what do you do? Well, you pull your gun, because this dude's digging around. You don't, like that's what you do. And he's not listening. Eventually he does listen, and then basically the cop puts his gun away, and Floyd's crying, and he's just like, all right, come on, you need to step out of the car. And Floyd's saying, oh, I was in a situation like this where I got shot, and it was clear at that point, and then you can tell how the officers are reacting from this point on, that basically Floyd's having a panic attack. And I wonder, what we're going to learn from this as, well, I should say, the right has some to learn, but not much to learn. Not as much to learn, because wait for the facts, extremely important. Wait for all evidence, extremely important. There's a reason there's a fact-finding phase of investigations. Even things that look black and white, like a dude kneeling on a dude's neck, there was context that led up to that shows more intent. Basically can show you intent, and can disprove assuming the worst. So, and this back to what I was saying with Stefan Molyneux, he was going on about like all this other evidence leading up pointing to the contrary, essentially that it wasn't homicide, wasn't the time for him to be doing that. It's just basically what you can say is like, look, I'm not happy this guy died, and you shouldn't kneel on a suspect's neck for 8 minutes, right? But that's as far as I'm willing to go. They kind of did smear the officer, and I feel bad because I think I participated in it in the sense of, he had all these previous, he'd been involved in other shootings, he had all these previous mishaps, and, it would look like, oh man, he should have been fired years ago. He had like 9 different mishaps. Well, for a guy who's seen a lot of, basically been involved with a lot of stuff, with the exception of the fact that essentially he kneeled on him, from the pre-video, from the body cam footage, it seems like he was incredibly patient and incredibly calm and was concerned with Floyd's well-being. And he talked to, witnesses who were involved. It wasn't at all what the media and the BLM supporters made it sound like. And so is this going to change some people? I don't know. Maybe some people can see the footage and will understand what led up to it. Some people are just going to be mad because, black man being arrested, therefore police brutality or racism or something. It doesn't even look like Floyd was really under criminal arrest. He was essentially under medical arrest because he was panicking. This changes a lot in the narrative, and if they had released, and it's a shame this had to be a leak. If they had released this the first week, the discussion would have been about the details of the event, not blanket slogans. Probably, Minneapolis might have probably still had problems because we saw in Ferguson, right? Michael Brown gets into a fight with a police officer after robbing a store, grabs the police officer's gun, shoots him in the hand, in the officer's own vehicle, and ends up getting shot and dies. And then Brown's accomplice comes out and says the cops shot him in cold blood. Now, there was no evidence of this, and this wasn't true, but Ferguson burned to the ground. Now, in this case, and it burned to the ground not because people are legitimately angry, but because they want to do things and they're waiting for that excuse. Would people have used Floyd's death as an excuse in Minneapolis to cause this amount of mayhem? Maybe. But I don't think they would have had was basically the moderate screening for them. People saying that, like, basically everybody who said, like, George Floyd's death justifies the looting and destruction, because they ignore the people who are actually being hurt. And they say it justifies the looting and destruction because, George Floyd was killed, and you're going to complain about, a building burning down with nobody in it? Well, now that it doesn't look like it was a killing, like it doesn't look like it was a deliberate homicide, those people look pretty stupid because, again, wait for the details. Don't assume the worst. Or you can assume the worst, but you got to just kind of like that's not a reason to become an activist, they sainted this guy, and really he what is it? Floyd got like a golden casket basically, and he definitely does not deserve to be smeared. But I think it's holding him up as some sort of martyr. He's not a martyr. He's a guy who had a panic attack, and that led to a snowball of unfortunate events, and basically he died because basically an officer put pressure in a place that wasn't supposed to put it for too long, and Floyd was having a panic attack plus drugs in the system. That's what killed him. It's really sad. I think basically he lost his job because of the COVID lockdowns. I mean, that's as much that was as much to do with setting him down the path of what occurred as the fact that the 4 officers were trying to deal with him. So I just kind of wanted to. I know this video is going on probably too long, but I kind of wanted to express my feelings on that, having just seen that, and just it's sad, but it's human. And if this doesn't sway, if this doesn't sway, um, basically the moderates who think, who are trying to marching for change or whatever they're trying to do, if this doesn't sway them back to basically negotiating and talking to people who actually, like something like that, would you defund those police? Or would you say, hey, we probably need to train them better? Um, maybe we need officers, like certain officers, parts of groups who are like essentially EMTs on top of it or something. Maybe we need to change the protocols of dealing with people having panic attacks. Like, that's what you would be saying. You wouldn't be saying, oh, it's rotten to the core. Like, this was racism. That it shoots the racism narrative out of the sky. It 100% blasts that. Um, had nothing to do with race. The mistakes made had nothing to do with race. Um, the lack of care for his well-being involved basically the only act that was not done in the care, not done in the best interest of George Floyd, was basically where he was putting the pressure with his knee. That's the only act. The other guys holding him down, holding him in place, that was so Floyd didn't hurt himself. And you could tell because he's flailing around. Them trying to put him in the car because they're trying to get him to wherever they got to get him so they can deal with the fact he's having a panic attack and because he needs medical. He also needs restraints too because he's a huge dude. And if you're a huge dude having a panic attack, you're likely, again, to hurt somebody else, hurt yourself. And it's not intentional. It's somebody having a medical event. This was all about nothing. This was this freak out was spring loaded, and they were just looking for an excuse to riot and start their revolution. This shoots. I mean, this is this is why John Adams defended the officers at the I think it was the it was called we might even call I forget what the Boston Massacre, but basically there was essentially a riot in process, and some British regulars ended up firing a shot, and they ended up killing somebody. And people wanted to essentially try and hang these regulars. They wanted them essentially lynched because they struck against the people. And John Adams said, "Look, we got to look at the evidence. We got to get testimony. We have to give these men due process." And when they processed it, they realized that essentially these guys had no intention of killing the colonists they killed. Basically, events unfolded, and that the men were innocent. They were just soldiers, just doing their job, and it wasn't. No illegal orders were given. There just was a chaos of the situation, and it was very unfortunate. And people got mad, people rioted, but that was what our country was founded on. I mean, John Adams was our second president of the United States, and he defended. I mean, he was the defense attorney for British regulars, the people, the people who were enforcing the oppression, as they say. But it's that important that you wait for the evidence and you give them due process. So I hope some people have learned a lesson about waiting for all the information, not marching in somebody's name when you really don't know for sure what's going on. It's a hoax, for lack of a better term. The whole narrative of this guy being singled out and murdered because he's black, it's not true. Not true at all. So, but a man's dead. A man who did not have ill intention died. An innocent man died, and we got to figure out what happened, why that occurred more, what the officers were, basically was it lack of training? Is that why that knee was there, or was it basically he was doing basically very poorly, holding his head down essentially by doing it by the neck because he's afraid of the guy slamming his head on the concrete, because that's something that does happen. You lay somebody down and they're having a fit and they're slamming their head, and they're not, like they can really hurt themselves. So I know maybe that's what he thought he was doing, putting pressure wise. He shouldn't have done that, but did he know? Was that was that just negligence, ignorance, or was it just maybe police protocol does have you put weight behind the neck? Maybe he applied too much. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe he wasn't applying enough to actually kill him. And that whole autopsy about him basically having a panic attack and then leading to a heart attack, maybe that's actually the case. We don't know, and they'll investigate it. But this whole witch hunt, this whole demanding. I mean, this guy, the police officer being arrested within 48 hours. He probably wasn't arrested, right? Like the Minneapolis Police Department probably didn't arrest him because the first thing they did is review the body cam footage. And they were like, well, okay, this guy died, but we understand your intent. We can see the whole event from literally fly on the shoulder of what's going on, and that shows the intent. So that makes sense now. And the other three officers, why there was a delay in arresting them, because one of them wasn't even in the slightest involved with what happened, because he was literally watching the other patrol car. And the other two who were holding him down in the back were basically making sure he didn't flail so he couldn't hurt himself. So they were, it was kind of clear they were either unaware or not in essentially a position, because it didn't seem like Chauvin was actually, his intent was malicious. There's no evidence or sign of that. This changes the whole narrative, and it makes it very sad. But at the same time, it's good to know that these four officers aren't murderers. It's good to know that it wasn't, like a rogue cop or a bad cop or anything like that. Like, it was a cop who may have made a mistake, but it wasn't somebody doing something malicious. That's pretty wild, I'm seeing like a thing float up here. But, I don't know. Long video on that. My thoughts aren't completely organized, but I just, a lot of people owe Stefan Molyneux an apology, and I think the people who have, basically wielded the sword in Floyd's name, they owe everyone an apology. They owe this country an apology, because the people who accused the Minneapolis Police Department of having some sort of underlying racist issues, they owe an apology. People who condemned, particularly those other three officers, they condemned them. I owe them an apology. I was thinking, I'm like, well, if those, because what I'm told by reading the stories, that basically three officers are present and they watched this guy kneel on his neck for 8 minutes, and they didn't do anything. Well, body cam footage shows something else, basically. So those three officers never should have been arrested. They never should have been charged. And now we're going to, of course, have riots when basically the second-degree murder charge doesn't stick on Chauvin, and then the other three officers are also acquitted. They're probably not going to be cops again because of just the, it's not safe for them to be police officers again. But they didn't deserve this. At the very least, the three officers who were basically arrested as accomplices, they did not deserve to have their lives permanently disrupted and ended in some ways, and their careers ended. We know that was not justice. In fact, this may not be a situation where justice is needed, other than basically finding a way to deal with huge dudes having panic attacks better. But I mean, there's things to learn. It's very sad, but turns out that whole systemic racist problems with the police departments, and particularly the Minneapolis Police Department, it's not true. Or I should say, the Floyd incident was not evidence of that. So, hey, you know, eat some humble pie. Never follow the mob. You know, my first instinct is to question things, and I don't always get it right. It turns out in this case, I didn't even question it enough. I thought the body cam footage would probably be inconclusive, because I was like, well, if you're dealing with a suspect who's like resisting at all, it might be really inconclusive, or it might just be mundane, and then it's like you can't tell what's going. But this was more of, you could tell something was wrong with George pretty much from the beginning, and that the man needed help, and the officers were trying to get him to help, and it ended in tragedy. But it wasn't a racist murder. It just wasn't. So, all right, go forward with your day, your week. I recommend tracking down the footage. It's not graphic. It is a little hard to watch because it's just so sad. But if you hear anybody pushing this whole systemic racism stuff, they don't got a leg to stand on. They can't say, they're gonna have to point at something else. I mean, it's kind of like that whole hands up, don't shoot thing I mentioned earlier, and that people still believe that didn't happen. And in this case, George Floyd being murdered through racial with the intent being racial prejudice or racism, like being what triggered him getting killed. There's no evidence of that. Absolutely no evidence of that. So, all right, long vid. I guess let me know in the comments what your guys' thoughts are. But I assume I'm not the only one who feels this way, who's kind of who saw that and is thinking it. Yeah, it's sad. I'm actually trying not to tear up a little bit thinking of because it was disturbing to see for the 8 minutes when he's on the ground and he's crying and the dude's kneeling on his neck. But I think seeing what led up to that, the panic, the issues he was having, the hyperventilation, as someone who's had anxiety attacks, that kind of hits home. I've luckily never had drugs to compound anything, but I have had that happen to me, and it's well, it is what it is. If you watch the video, you'll see. And but hey, that's that.